I still remember the first time I held him. He wasn't mine by blood, but in that moment, it didn't matter. His tiny hand wrapped around my finger and something inside me just clicked. That was 23 years ago. And today I'm sitting in my quiet kitchen, holding a coffee cup gone cold, staring at a wedding invitation with his name on it, addressed not to Mom, but to Mrs. Ellen Parker. It's strange how a single envelope can hold so much distance. When I close my eyes, I can still see the boy who used to run through this house with scraped knees and chocolate on his cheeks. He used to call me Mama Ellen. Now, I wonder if he remembers ever calling me that at all. I met Ryan when he was 3. His mother, Laura, had been my best friend since college. We lived 2 houses apart. Same street, same cul-de-sac, same dreams of a quiet life. But life doesn't care about plans. Laura passed away in a car accident one rainy night on her way home from work. I remember that call. The way my hand shook so badly I dropped the phone. The silence that followed after the police left still feels like it lives in these walls. Ryan had no father in the picture. He'd left before the boy was even born. And so, in that moment, when the court asked if I could take him in temporarily, I said yes without thinking. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. All I knew was that there was a little boy sitting on my couch, clutching a stuffed bear, asking when his mommy was coming home. And I didn't have the heart to tell him she wasn't. The first few weeks were hard. He barely spoke. He wouldn't eat unless I made the same peanut butter sandwiches his mom used to. At night, he'd sneak into my room and sleep at the foot of my bed like he was afraid I might disappear too. It broke me, seeing that kind of fear in a child's eyes. So I did the only thing I could. I loved him, years passed. And somewhere between school lunches and bedtime stories, temporary became forever. He grew up calling me Mama Ellen. I still remember the first time he said it. I had been helping him tie his shoes before kindergarten. He looked up and said, "Thank you, Mama Ellen." I froze for a second, then smiled so wide it hurt. From then on, I stopped thinking of myself as a temporary anything. I was his mother in every way that mattered. We had our little life, just the 2 of us. I worked as a nurse at the local clinic, and every evening I'd come home to his drawings taped to the fridge. Most of them were stick figures, me, him, and our cat, Whiskers. Always smiling, always holding hands. He'd wait by the window when I came home. And sometimes he'd run out barefoot just to hug me before I even reached the porch. Those were the best years of my life. Simple, quiet, full of love. As he grew older, things changed, as they always do. Teenagers drift and mothers worry. But with Ryan, the change came quietly. It started with shorter dinners. Then missed calls. Then weekends spent elsewhere. With friends, he'd say, or with his coach. I told myself it was normal. That I had to let him grow. But sometimes late at night, I'd find myself standing at his bedroom door, listening to the silence. The toys were gone. The drawings had been replaced by trophies. And the boy who once clung to me now barely said goodnight. Still, I held on. I told myself that love, real love, doesn't need constant proof, and yet, every time he left the house without saying goodbye, it felt like a little piece of my heart went with him. There were still moments that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. Like when he'd come home late and whisper, "Night, Mama," thinking I couldn't hear. Or when he'd quietly fix something around the house, a broken chair leg, a squeaky door, and pretend it wasn't for me. He cared. I knew he did, even if he was growing into a world that didn't include me as much anymore. Then came college. That was when everything changed for good. He got into a university out of state, a good one. I was proud, of course. I helped him pack his things, even labeled the boxes with neat handwriting. He barely looked up as I did. When it was time for him to leave, I stood on the porch, waving until his car disappeared down the street. He didn't look back. That night, I sat at his empty desk and found a note he'd left behind. It said, "Thanks for everything. Ellen, just Ellen. No mama, no love, Ryan. Just thanks." And that was the first time I realized he might be forgetting who I was to him. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the lights flicker on in the houses around me. Everyone else seemed to have someone coming home. I had silence. That was the first time I truly understood what it meant to love someone unconditionally, even when they stop calling you Mom. That was years ago. And now here I am, sitting with this wedding invitation in my hands. The same boy, now a man, about to start his own family, and I can't help but wonder, will his wife ever know who I was to him? Will he ever tell her about the woman who tucked him in, who stayed up through his fevers, who whispered that his mother loved him even when he didn't remember her face anymore? Or will I just be Ellen Parker? A name on a list, a distant memory, a woman who once raised someone else's child? That's where my story begins. Not when I met him, but when I realized love sometimes means letting go of being remembered. The wedding invitation stayed on my kitchen table for weeks. I'd pick it up every morning, read his name over and over, and tell myself that I should be happy for him. That's what mothers do, right? We celebrate even when it hurts, but deep down I couldn't shake this heavy ache in my chest. Not because he was getting married, but because I had to find out through the mail. No phone call, no visit. No, Mom, I've got news. Just a formal envelope with elegant cursive, as if I were a guest instead of family. The days felt longer after that. I went through my usual routines, watering the plants, feeding the neighbor's cat when they were away, working part-time at the clinic, but everything felt muted, like someone had turned the volume down on my world. Sometimes I'd walk past his old room, still exactly as he left it. The trophies were dusty now. The curtains hadn't been opened in months. On his bookshelf sat a photo of us from when he was 8, both of us smiling wide, ice cream dripping down our hands after a summer fair. I traced the edge of that frame more times than I'd like to admit. Then one afternoon, I got a call. A number I didn't recognize. Hello? Mrs. Parker? The voice was unfamiliar, polite, distant. Yes, this is she. This is Emily, she said softly. Ryan's fiancé. For a second, I didn't know what to say. My heart fluttered, hope and fear all tangled together. Oh, I said finally, my voice shaking slightly. Hello, Emily. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time, she continued. I just wanted to make sure you got the invitation. Ryan wanted me to send them out. I froze on that one line. Ryan wanted me to send them out. Not we sent them, not he asked about you. Just a formality. Yes, I got it, I said, forcing a small laugh. Thank you for calling. There was a pause. She hesitated, then said, He's been busy with work lately. I'm sure he meant to reach out. It was kind of her to say that. The kind of kindness you offer a stranger you don't want to hurt. After we hung up, I sat there, staring at the wall. Somewhere between her words, I heard the truth. He hadn't mentioned me, and that quiet realization hurt more than I expected. That night, I pulled out an old box from under my bed, a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were memories I had kept of his childhood. Crayon drawings, Mother's Day cards, notes from school. One in particular caught my eye. It was a crooked little card that said, "To Mama Ellen, the best mom ever. I love you more than cookies," I smiled through tears. He was 5 when he made that. His handwriting was shaky, his heart wide open. What happens between that kind of love and the silence that follows years later? When does a child stop seeing the woman who raised him and start seeing her as just someone who used to be there? Weeks passed. I finally decided I would go to the wedding. Not out of obligation, but because some part of me still needed to see him happy, even if he didn't see me anymore. I bought a soft blue dress, simple but elegant. I practiced my smile in the mirror, the kind that hides pain but still looks warm. On the day of the wedding, the church was filled with flowers and laughter. People hugged, music played, and the air buzzed with joy. When I walked in, a few heads turned, polite smiles offered. No one really knew who I was. And then, there he was, Ryan, standing by the altar, taller, older, with a confidence I barely recognized. He looked happy, and for a moment, I felt relief. He didn't see me at first. When our eyes finally met, something flickered in his. Surprise, maybe discomfort. I couldn't tell. He smiled, but it wasn't the same. It was the kind of smile you give to someone whose name you can't quite remember. Ellen, he said when he finally came over. You made it. Not Mama Ellen. Not even it's so good to see you. Just Ellen. My throat tightened. I nodded, forcing a calm smile. Of course, I said softly. I wouldn't miss it. He hugged me lightly, like you might hug an acquaintance, and then turned away as another guest called his name, and just like that, he was gone again. During the ceremony, I sat quietly in the third row. Emily was radiant. She looked at him the way I used to look at the boy who clung to my hand when he was scared of the dark. When they exchanged vows, I smiled. I meant it, even through the ache. But when he said, I couldn't have done this without the people who shaped me, and thanked his teachers, his friends, and even a mentor from work, but not me, something inside me cracked. Quietly, no one noticed. But I felt it. After the ceremony, I slipped outside for air. The garden was quiet, sunlight flickering through the trees. I found a bench and sat there, hands trembling just slightly. A few minutes later, Emily came out. She sat beside me without saying anything for a while. Then she said gently, "He talks about you sometimes." I turned to her, surprised. "He does?" She nodded. "He said there was a woman who took care of him when he was little. That you were kind, that you saved him." Her words hung in the air. "That's all?" I asked softly. Emily hesitated. "He said he's not good at looking back, that it hurts him. I think he doesn't know how to face the past." I looked down at my hands. "I suppose that's fair," I whispered. "But for some of us, the past is all we have left." That night, I went home to a quiet house again. The dress hung over a chair, the smell of wedding flowers still lingering faintly in my hair. I made tea, sat by the window, and tried to find peace in knowing he was happy. But peace is tricky. It doesn't always come when you expect it. Sometimes it arrives slowly, in the spaces between what you hoped for and what really happened. A few days later, I got a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, Ryan and Emily on their wedding day. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "Thank you for being there." No signature. No "Love, Ryan." But I still pressed the photo to my chest and let the tears fall. Because even if he didn't say it, I wanted to believe, somewhere deep down, he still remembered me. I used to think love meant being remembered. But as I sat there in the fading light, I realized maybe love is also about letting someone forget, if that's what they need to move on. Maybe love, the kind that lasts, doesn't ask for recognition. It just exists, quiet, steady, unseen. The morning after the wedding, the house felt emptier than usual. I woke up early. Old habits never really go away, and made 2 cups of coffee before realizing there was no one to drink the second one. I laughed a little to myself, though it sounded more like a sigh. The sun was pouring through the window, golden and soft. But even light can feel lonely sometimes. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my coffee mug, listening to the silence. I'd spent years caring for people. Ryan, my late husband, even neighbors who needed a hand, and yet somehow, I had forgotten what it felt like to care for myself. It hit me slowly. I didn't know what to do with my life anymore, not in a dramatic, hopeless way. Just in a quiet, unfamiliar one. Like I had been walking for years with purpose, and suddenly realized the path had disappeared beneath my feet. I decided to take a walk. The neighborhood was the same as it had always been. Tidy lawns, barking dogs, children biking down the sidewalks. But I noticed things I hadn't before. The small cracks in the pavement, the fading paint on mailboxes, the sound of wind rustling through the maples. Maybe when life slows down, you start noticing what's been there all along. When I reached the park, I sat on my usual bench, the one by the pond. I used to come here with Ryan when he was a boy. We'd feed ducks and make up stories about where they flew at night. I remember one time when he was around 10, he said, "Mom, if ducks ever forget where they came from, do they still belong to their flock?" I laughed back then, not knowing how deep that question would one day feel. Now, all these years later, sitting by the same pond, I whispered to the air, "Yes, sweetheart, they do." A gentle breeze brushed my face, and for a moment, it felt like the universe was listening. I don't know how long I sat there. Time seemed to move differently when you had no one waiting for you at home. I began to think about the first day Ryan came into my life. He was only 3, so small, so frightened, holding onto a stuffed dinosaur that had seen better days. I had just lost my own baby the year before, a daughter who didn't make it past birth. The doctors said it wasn't meant to be, but those words never softened the ache. When the social worker called and asked if I could take in a foster child, I said yes before I even thought about it. Something inside me just needed to love again. And when I first held Ryan in my arms, it was like a missing piece of my soul finally found its way back. I promised myself that day I would protect him, raise him, love him, no matter what, and I did. Through scraped knees, school projects, and teenage storms. Through nights when he cried and days when he laughed so hard I thought my heart would burst. But life doesn't always repay love in the way we expect. I used to think that love was like a circle, that what you give eventually comes back around. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just drifts out into the world, changing shape, finding new homes, leaving you with empty hands but a full heart. And maybe that's still enough. That night, I decided to clean out the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. The air was dusty, the light dim, and the wooden floor creaked with every step. I found boxes filled with things I'd stored away. Some old furniture, a few of my husband's books, and a stack of letters. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Ryan used to write to me from summer camp. "Dear Mom," one letter said, "I miss you, but don't worry, I'm eating lots of marshmallows." Another said, "Can we go to the lake when I get home?" "Just us?" I smiled through tears as I read them. That little boy had once thought I was his whole world. And now he had built a world without me. It hurt. But as I read his words again, I realized I had been part of the reason he could. I had loved him enough to make him strong enough to move on. That's what mothers are supposed to do, aren't they? Raise their children so they don't need them anymore. It's just, no one ever tells you how quiet the house feels after they leave. The days turned into weeks. I found myself talking to neighbors more, volunteering at the library, baking again. Not because I wanted to fill the silence, but because I wanted to rediscover who Ellen was, apart from being Mom. I even started a little garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, basil, and daisies, simple things. There was something healing about watching life grow again. Sometimes when I watered the plants in the evening, I'd imagine Ryan's voice calling from inside. "Mom, what's for dinner?" The memory would make me smile, not in pain anymore, but with gratitude. One afternoon, I got another letter. It was from Ryan, handwritten. My heart skipped a beat before I even opened it. Inside it said, "Hi, Ellen. I've been thinking a lot lately. Emily told me you looked beautiful at the wedding. I should have said more that day, but I didn't know how. Growing up, I didn't understand what you gave up for me. I didn't realize love could be that big, that quiet. I don't know how to make up for the years I lost, but I wanted you to know. You'll always be my mom. Love, Ryan." I held that letter for a long time, tears running freely this time, not from pain, but release. All the years of silence, the ache, the wondering, it all softened with those words. He remembered. Not my name, not just Ellen. He remembered who I was to him. That night, I sat by the window again. The stars were out. Thousands of tiny lights scattered across the sky. I thought about how each star burns quietly for years, unseen by most, yet it still shines. Maybe that's what love really is. Not the grand gestures or the perfect endings. Just the steady light you offer to someone, even when they're far away. I didn't need anything from Ryan anymore. Not visits, not phone calls. Just knowing he had found his peace, that he remembered where he came from, was enough. And for the first time in a long while, I felt light again. I brewed a cup of tea, opened the window, and whispered to the night, "Thank you for coming back, my boy. I'm okay now." That was the night I realized something simple yet profound. The greatest gift love gives us is the strength to let go and still remain whole. After Ryan's letter, something inside me shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No tears on the floor, no grand realization. Just a soft warmth, like the first ray of morning sunlight slipping through the curtains after a long, cold night. For so long, I had been waiting for an apology. But what I really needed was understanding, not just from Ryan, but from myself. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen, holding that letter like a fragile piece of my heart. Then I placed it gently inside the wooden box where I kept my most precious things, old family photos, my wedding ring, and a few dried flowers from the garden Ryan and I once planted together. It felt right to keep it there, not on display, not hidden, but somewhere safe, somewhere it belonged. I started to make small changes in my routine. I rearranged the furniture, painted the living room a soft sage green, and finally took down the old curtains that had hung there for years. It was like I was slowly breathing new life into the house and into myself. One afternoon, while cleaning the shelves, I found an old photo of Ryan as a teenager, awkward, lanky, holding a fishing pole, grinning ear to ear. I laughed softly. I could almost hear him teasing me again. "Mom, you don't know how to bait a hook." That boy, he had given me some of the best years of my life, and for that, I would always be grateful. I began volunteering at the local library, just a few hours a week at first. It was peaceful there. The smell of books, the gentle hum of quiet conversations, the sense of being surrounded by stories. There was something healing about it. Helping people find words that might comfort them. The same way, stories had always comforted me. There was a young woman who came in often. Her name was Lily. She was newly divorced and struggling to rebuild her life. Sometimes she'd linger after closing, talking about how hard it was to start over. One day she looked at me with tired eyes and asked, "How did you do it? How did you move on after losing so much?" I thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't move on," I said softly. "I grew around it, like a tree that bends around a broken branch." She smiled, and I realized something. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning how to keep living with the memory, not the pain. A few weeks later, Ryan called. I was washing dishes when the phone rang, and for a moment, I almost didn't answer. Then I saw his name on the screen. "Hi, Mom," he said. Just like that. 2 words, but they were enough to make my heart tremble. We talked for a while, about small things mostly. His job, his new apartment, Emily's cooking. But there was a gentleness in his voice that hadn't been there before. Before hanging up, he said quietly, "I'd like to visit soon. If that's okay." I smiled through tears. "I'd like that, sweetheart." He came a week later on a Sunday. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him at first. Taller, older, carrying the weight of his own adult life now. But when he smiled, it was the same boy I had raised. He brought a small bouquet of lilies. "Emily said these are your favorite," he said awkwardly. "They are," I replied, taking them gently. "Thank you." We sat in the living room, talking about nothing and everything. The weather, movies, how the neighborhood had changed. But beneath all that small talk was something deeper, a quiet understanding, a shared history neither of us could quite put into words. At one point, Ryan looked around and said, "It feels smaller than I remember." I laughed softly. "That's because you've grown, honey. Everything looks smaller when you've grown," he nodded, smiling a little. Then he said something that caught me off guard. I was scared to come back. "Why?" I asked gently. "Because I thought you'd be angry. Or disappointed." I took his hand, warm and trembling slightly. "Ryan, love doesn't disappear just because we stop showing it for a while. It waits." Quietly. He looked at me then, really looked, and whispered, "I missed you, Mom." And just like that, all the years of silence melted away. No dramatic tears, no big apologies, just 2 people remembering how to love each other again. That evening, after he left, I sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, the air filled with the smell of cut grass and blooming jasmine. I thought about all the years I had spent waiting for that moment, not realizing that healing had already begun long before he ever came back. Sometimes, we don't need closure from others. We need it from ourselves. In the weeks that followed, I began writing again. Not letters and stories, small ones, about motherhood, about loss, about love that doesn't fade even when it changes form. It was as if every word I wrote helped me stitch another part of myself back together. I even started a little blog for fun, just sharing reflections and gentle thoughts about life. To my surprise, people began to read them, strangers who said my words helped them feel less alone. It made me realize that even pain can have purpose if we let it. That maybe the heart doesn't break to destroy us. It breaks open, so light can come in. One afternoon, while tending my garden, I found a small bird's nest tucked between the rose bushes. Inside were 3 tiny eggs, pale blue and fragile. I stood there, smiling softly. Life keeps renewing itself, no matter how broken things may seem. I whispered to the little nest, "You're safe here. Take your time. And I realized I was talking to myself too. A few months later, I visited Ryan and Emily at their new home. It was small but full of warmth, the kind of place that felt alive. Emily hugged me tightly. "I've heard so much about you," she said. I smiled. "I hope it was mostly good." "All of it," she said. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, salad, and apple pie. We laughed, shared stories, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like part of a family again. At one point, Emily placed her hand on her belly and said shyly, "We wanted you to be the first to know." "We're expecting." My breath caught. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered, touching her hand. "That's wonderful." Ryan looked at me with a soft smile. "We want our child to know you, really know you." And that moment, was the quiet miracle I didn't know I'd been waiting for. That night, as I drove home, I passed the park where I used to take Ryan as a boy. The same pond, the same ducks, only now I was older, and the air felt gentler somehow. I parked the car and walked to the bench, our old bench. The moonlight shimmered on the water, and I sat there, closing my eyes, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, I felt complete. Not because everything had gone back to the way it was, but because I had learned to live with how it had changed. Life doesn't always give us back what we lose. Sometimes it gives us something new, something gentler. And maybe that's what love truly is. Not about being remembered perfectly, but about being carried quietly in someone's heart, even when miles or years stand between you. It's been almost a year since that dinner at Ryan and Emily's home. Sometimes, when I sit in my favorite chair by the window, I still think about everything that's happened. The years of distance, the silence, the ache of being forgotten, and the unexpected way love found its way back. The pain isn't gone completely. It still lives somewhere deep inside me. Quiet, like an old song I can't quite forget. But it no longer hurts the way it used to. Now, it just reminds me of how much I cared. Last month, they had their baby, a little boy named Eli. When Ryan called to tell me, I could barely speak. He said, "Mom, we'd like you to meet him first." The next day, I drove over, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, my heart fluttering like it hadn't in years. When I held Eli for the first time, everything else faded away. The years, the distance, the hurt. All I could see was this tiny, perfect reminder that love keeps finding its way forward, even when we think it's over. He had Ryan's eyes. And when he yawned, he looked just like the baby I once rocked to sleep decades ago. Emily smiled at me and said softly, "He's lucky to have you." I looked down at Eli, his little hand curling around my finger, and whispered, "No, I'm the lucky one." Sometimes I still find myself wondering what would have happened if I hadn't written back to Ryan after that letter. If I had stayed angry. If I had let pride win over love. But I know now that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing ourselves. It's about making room in our hearts for peace to return. I didn't forgive because he asked. I forgave because I couldn't keep living in the past. In the evenings, I often walk around the neighborhood as the sun sets. Kids ride their bikes past me, and I can hear laughter drifting from the nearby houses. Sometimes I see young mothers calling their children in for dinner, and it makes me smile. Life keeps going, always moving, always changing. And I've learned that no matter how far apart we drift from the ones we love, there's always a way back, even if it looks different than before. A few weeks ago, Ryan and Emily came to visit with baby Eli. He's growing so fast, all bright eyes and soft giggles. Ryan sat with me on the porch while Emily took pictures of the baby among the flowers. We didn't talk about the past that day. We didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said was already understood, quietly, deeply. Ryan turned to me and said, "I've been thinking a lot lately about when I was younger. I wish I had appreciated you more back then." I smiled, shaking my head. "Don't we all wish that about someone?" He laughed softly, and for a moment we just sat in silence, the kind that feels peaceful, not empty. Before leaving, he hugged me tightly. And when he said, "I love you, Mom," I didn't hold back the tears this time. They weren't from sadness. They were from gratitude. That night, after they left, I went out to my garden again. The evening air was cool and the sky glowed with the last bit of sunset. I sat on the bench Ryan helped me build years ago, and I closed my eyes. I could still hear echoes of laughter, his, mine, little Eli's, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Not really. Love had never left me. It had just been waiting for me to be ready again. She looks peaceful, the camera slowly pulling back as she gazes into the sunset. I've learned something I wish I could tell my younger self. You can give someone your heart and still keep your own. You can lose people and still find love again in unexpected places. And you can be forgotten for a while, but still remembered when it matters most. Because real love, the kind that shapes you, teaches you, breaks you and rebuilds you, it never truly disappears. It just changes form. Sometimes it becomes distance. Sometimes it becomes silence. And sometimes it becomes a small boy named Eli laughing in the sunlight. Now when I look at the world around me, the blooming roses, the sound of birds at dawn, the warmth of a child's tiny hand, I don't think about what I've lost anymore. I think about what I've learned, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. That healing isn't loud and it's gentle, quiet, patient, and that even after love fades or changes, it still leaves light behind. I raised a boy who became a man. He may have forgotten my name once, but now when he calls me Mom, I know he truly means it, and that's more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find peace in your own, no matter how broken, no matter how late.